And I call the honourable member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'd firstly like to congratulate the Honourable Bronwyn Bishop, member for Mackellar, on her appointment as Speaker of the House. In speaking about the campaign, I'd like to thank the voters of the electorate of Boothby for the privilege and honour of representing them for a 7th term in Parliament. Representing the most marginal coalition seat in a hung Parliament meant there was always a lot of interest in the campaign and in this seat. The previous Parliament was a tough 3 years. Every vote was important, and the difference between being in government and being in opposition was only 1 seat. In talking about the campaign, and this was my 7th election campaign, the way that everyone combined, the staff, the Liberal Party membership, my supporters, the state members and candidates, and the state and federal secretariats was exemplary. It was a model campaign. I'd like to thank my electorate staff who really put in the hard yards and went the extra mile during my campaign. Anne Cure, Ryan Post, Matthew He, Marion Themeliotis, Zoe Darling, Tom Shinkle and Courtney Norse. Of my volunteers, again, the ones who gave up hours and hours of their own time, who were so keen to see a change of government, I'd like to mention a couple in particular. Bill Haycox, Fran Southern, Paul Guesty, Matt Schilling, Graham Copley, Ralph Walker, Sam Crozer, Cathy He and Janet Hillgrove. Of course, the campaign relied on hundreds and hundreds of volunteers, old friends, new friends and people who were desperate to see a change in government. I'd like to thank the state and federal secretariats, State Director Jeff Green, Deputy State Director Matt Halliwell, for their assistance throughout the election and their prompt guidance when it was needed. I'd like to thank Brian Loughnane and Julian Sheasel again for their interest and for their words of advice. I'd like to thank the state members and candidates, all of whom played a role in the campaign. Ian Evans, Duncan McFettridge, Martin Hamilton-Smith and the state candidates David Spears, Carolyn Habib, Sam DeLuc and Corey Wingard. I'd like to thank the Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister and Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party and Minister for Foreign Affairs, all of whom visited the electorate last year and who greatly assisted the momentum in our campaign. And I'd like to thank all of the other ministers who visited over the previous 3 years. Lastly, I'd like to thank my family. I'd like to thank Kate for her enormous support over the last 15 years. And I'd like to thank my 2 youngest volunteers, Henry and Georgina, Henry at 11 and Georgina at 9, who again were very much our secret weapon. This was an important campaign. The 2010 election had been close, and so we knew that every vote counted. The electorate of Boothby is a great electorate to represent. Terrific institutions, schools, Flinders University, the Waite Institute and important hospitals like Flinders Medical Centre and Dorr Park. One of the major issues was the lack of investment in infrastructure that we'd seen in the south. I had been fighting for 6 years to see South Road become a north-south corridor, a non-stop north-south corridor. One of the issues in Adelaide is that, unfortunately, the state made a decision going back 40 years ago not to invest in expressways or freeways. And when you travel around Australia, you realise that the infrastructure, the road infrastructure in Adelaide, is particularly poor. We don't have the expressways or freeways that other capital cities do. And one of the things that Adelaide desperately needs is a non-stop north-south expressway. The RAA identified this in their 2005 report. And there's been various promises made over the years, and one that I've been particularly focused on, which has been promised since 2006, is having a grade separation at South Road and Sturt Road. All the traffic surveys show that this is the major cause of delay on South Road now that Grand Junction Road and Cormac Road have been dealt with by the Superway. In my regular surveys, door knocking and listening posts, traffic congestion is often at the top of my constituents' concerns. Adelaide used to be known as the 20-minute city, and now what we see is increasing traffic congestion because of a failure to invest in infrastructure going back decades. So I was particularly pleased in late April when the Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, made an announcement that working with Infrastructure Australia and the South Australian Government, we would invest $500 million in federal funding to improve South Road where it connects to the Southern Expressway. That is, having an interchange of the Southern Expressway going on to South Road and grade separations at Flinders Drive and Sturt Road. We're also providing the funding for the South Australian Government to complete the business case for the Darlington interchange project. Now, this is a project which State Labor first promised in 2006, 8 years ago, and there has been no progress on it since. It's very important, if we are to build the roads of the 21st century, that we do start to address the major bottlenecks on South Road. Now, we need to see this project is underway as soon as possible. And as I've already said, we're allocating $500 million to complete the Darlington interchange and the Darlington project as a priority. We're committed to upgrading the entire South Road within a decade, and it's expected that more funding in the coming years will be allocated to get the Torrens to Torrens project completed and additional upgrades underway. However, the Darlington upgrade is the priority, and this is what we need to improve our productive capacity in the future. One of the other major issues during the campaign was the issue around cost of living. And one of the most important things this parliament can do is to abolish the carbon tax. We are trying to abolish the carbon tax, and this is an important thing. It's all families bear the cost of the carbon tax. It's our bill to cut your carbon tax bill. Scrapping the carbon tax will mean that families will be on average $550 better off next financial year. Electricity bills will be $200 lower a year and gas bills $70 a year. Abolishing the carbon tax will provide a stimulus to jobs, it will provide a stimulus to the economy, and it will reduce the pressure on families' cost of living. Now, I saw this in my electorate. The carbon tax was damaging to businesses in my local electorate of Boothby. The Blair Hotel, when they were hit with their first electricity bill under the carbon tax, they saw their off-peak power rate increase by 45% as a direct result of the carbon tax. Another initiative that I'm particularly pleased to see come back again is the Green Army. The Howard government implemented the Green Corps program as a way of employing young people in environmental projects to preserve and restore our natural and cultural environment. Green Corps provided young people with improved career and employment prospects through accredited training, on-the-project training and personal development while participating in environmental and heritage projects. Over the life of the Green Corps program, participants delivered, they propagated and planted over 14 million trees. They erected more than 8,000 kilometres of fencing. They cleared over 50,000 hectares of weeds, and they constructed or maintained more than 5,000 kilometres of walking tracks or boardwalks. So the Coalition will create a standing Green Army that will gradually build to a 15,000-strong environmental workforce. We will create and properly resource the Green Army as a larger and more lasting version of the former Green Corps. It will be Australia's largest ever environmental deployment. It will mark the first time that Australia has approached environmental remediation with the same seriousness and level of organisation that we have long brought to bushfire preparedness and other local and regional priorities. Now, I've had a number of projects submitted to me as being possible Green Army initiatives. A removal of weeds and olive trees in Merino Conservation Park. Maintenance of Belair National Park, including the creek which runs from the park through Glenalta, Hawthorne Dean, Coromandel Valley to Sturt Creek. Creation of a wildlife corridor between parks and open spaces to plant native trees and provide nesting boxes for wildlife. Removal of weeds along main roads and railway lines, and installing benches along trail walks to encourage people to go out and enjoy the parks of Boothby. Mitcham Hills will be one of the first sites nationally to benefit under the Coalition's Green Army. What we have in the Mitcham Hills is a lot of undergrowth, a lot of woody weeds, which does lead to a fire hazard. The Minister for the Environment has announced that a coalition government will undertake feral olive and woody weed eradication in the Mitcham Hills as part of its commitment to build a 15,000-strong Green Army nationwide. Woody weeds and feral olives create significant amounts of bushfire fuel throughout the Mitcham Hills. Last weekend we saw how one spark can start a bushfire when on Saturday morning a blaze started in Belair National Park, an 850-hectare national park. Fortunately, the CFS, the SES and SAPOL responded promptly, and the blaze was contained to 3 hectares. Another major issue that the state of South Australia faces is the economy. We continually lag in all the measures compared with other states. We've seen 27,000 jobs lost over the last 4 years. We need to create an environment whereby businesses feel confident to invest, to grow, to employ new staff. Abolishing the carbon tax will help that. Reducing red tape will help that. Building our infrastructure, such as South Road, which will improve the productivity, will improve the economy of our state. And I'm pleased that while the news was very bad that Holden has decided not to continue manufacturing in Australia, the Prime Minister has acted promptly by establishing a South Australian review panel, including some eminent South Australian businessmen such as Raymond Spencer and Robert Champion de Crepigny. And what we see in my electorate at the Waite Institute, we see an area where we do have a competitive advantage. South Australia has always been good at exporting grain, wheat and wine. But what we see at the Waite Institute is a world-best scientific facility in the areas of ag science and genomics, which is providing an enormous competitive advantage. This is about the approach that the government will take. It's about backing our strengths. And what we see with the new SAMRI is South Australia has the potential to develop a biotech precinct in that North Terrace area. In the same way that we've seen Parkville in Melbourne, a long-established biotech precinct, and the same way that Brisbane has become that, Adelaide has the opportunity, again, to build on our existing strengths, Australia's renowned excellence in research, in clinical trials, and we need to foster the climate where that can occur. In my electorate of Boothby, the former site of the Mitsubishi car plant at Tonsley Park offers enormous opportunities. Flinders University have moved a number of their functions, computing science, engineering and maths. Flinders University have existing strengths in the area of medical devices, and this is another area where South Australia could really become a centre for innovation and, again, focus on something that we do well. In the area of health, I was very pleased in the last Parliament to have to focus very much on primary health care. The GP super clinics were something that I was heavily critical of because I believe it was a misguided policy. It was actually really distorting the whole market for investment in general practice. When we look at Australia's primary healthcare system, we do have a good primary healthcare system, but I believe that we can do much better in areas like diabetes, in cardiac failure, in COPD. There are a number of chronic diseases where we could make sure that there are better incentives to make sure that people really get the gold standard. We do have a good primary health care system, but I believe it could be better, and that's something that I'll be focusing on in this next term of Parliament. In the area of PBS listings, Australia should have timely access to innovative new treatments that are safe, effective and cost-effective. Subsidisation of new medicines through the PBS was for a long time a stable, bipartisan process that was respected in Australia and abroad. It was understood by all the participants. The PBAC was put in place to advise governments and make recommendations on new medicines. And yet what we saw under the previous government was a chaotic process. They signed a memorandum of understanding with the sector to provide policy stability in return for savings. And then within months of signing that memorandum, they deferred the listing of 7 medicines and a vaccine that had been recommended by the PBAC and would have had to have gone to Cabinet for approval. And so it was chaotic decision-making. There was no clarity for businesses. There was no clarity for consumers. So the Coalition has said we will restore the PBS process to a stable, apolitical, evidence-based approach. The PBAC will return and its recommendations will not be ignored. The Health Minister will have authority to list lower-cost treatments that have been recommended by the PBAC without Cabinet approval for medicines that do not cost more than $20 million in any year over the first 4 years of listings. Priorities and accelerated clinical trial reforms to allow new medicines will be tested. We'll provide faster access to treatment for patients. So what we need is to restore transparency, certainty and confidence to the process for listing medicines on the Pharmaceutical Benefit Scheme. In the area of private health insurance, we see that private health insurance plays an important role in taking pressure off the public health system. We will reinvest in private health insurance once fiscal circumstances allow. The current government understands that private health insurance plays a key role in reducing waiting lists and keeping pressure off the already struggling public hospital system. It allows people to have a choice of doctor, a choice of specialist, a choice of surgeon, a choice of anaesthetist, a choice of allied health practitioner and a choice of hospital. The government the Coalition has always recognised this and will continue to fight for the role of private health insurance in our health system. In my electorate, this is a key issue. 76% of voters hold some form of private health insurance, and this has always been a big issue in every election that I've fought. 2,000 residents in my electorate petitioned to have the private health insurance rebate retained intact. This is something that the previous government promised to do and then broke its promise in 2008, 2009 and 2010. In conclusion, I would like to thank the voters in Boothby for the opportunity to serve them in Parliament. It's a great honour and I look forward to representing them over the next 3 years. Thank you.